As is much of psychology, whether genetics or social upbringing plays a more significant role in the development and long term behavior of a human is up for debate. While no side has proved absolute, many psychologists argue that DNA covers much more than just one's appearance and decides an individual's personality before they are even born. However, there are also experts that insist a child's environment and early experiences more so determine how they behave into their adulthood. This concept is known as nature versus nurture and looks at all the factors that could play a role in a person's social and mental attributes. I personally believe that an individual is not born with a full personality intact and that environmental factors impact a person's development and behavior more so than that of genetic factors. To further the research in this debate, we will take a look at well known serial killer Dennis Rader, also known as the BTK killer. A serial killer is an individual who murders a series of victims over a period of time, typically with lengthy time gaps between each killing. Some serial killers also kidnap or torture their victims before murdering them. There's often an unclear or no motive for these serial killers to commit such heinous acts. Because most mentally healthy individuals couldn't fathom committing crimes such as those of a normal serial killers are often found to have large fascinations and followings when people are aware of their activity. But what allows a person to intentionally kill or harm others without any remorse? More common than not, most serial killers have a severe mental health disease or disorder, and they are most often one of the following: Psychopathy. Psychopathy is a serious personality disorder one is born with and therefore genetically inherits. There is no psychopath gene that a person can carry, but it has been found that psychopathy does tend to run in families. Even if a parent does not have psychopathy, they may carry one or more genetic variant that increases their child's probability of contracting the disorder. A person with psychopathy is characterized to have superficial charm, high intelligence, poor judgment, and failure to learn from experience. Psychopathy also makes it nearly impossible for the patient to have empathy or remorse towards their action or others. While they commonly have an incapacity for love, like healthy people, many psychopaths do actually love their families in their own way, but they have difficulty loving and trusting the rest of the world. Sociopathy. Most experts believe psychopaths and sociopaths share a similar set of traits. People like this have a poor inner sense of right and wrong. They also can't seem to understand or share other person's feelings, but there are some differences too. A key difference between a psychopath and a sociopath is whether the individual has a conscience. Unlike a psychopath who isn't fazed by moral qualms, a sociopath typically has a conscience, but it's very weak. The current belief is that psychopathy generally comes from genetic factors and sociopathy results from an interruption in development by abuse or other trauma in childhood. Other antisocial personality disorders. Antisocial personality disorders are kind of the general concept of the two previous disorders. However, to be diagnosed, you don't have to follow the traits of a psychopath or sociopath as uniformly. The cause of antisocial personality disorder is faulted to genetic factors and environmental factors together, but neither has been declared to be the overall source. A person with an antisocial personality disorder may be unusually good at flattery and manipulating other people and their emotions, breaking the law often and repeatedly, disregarding the safety of themselves or others, having problems with substance abuse, lying, stealing, and fighting, not showing guilt or remorse, and being easily angered. Now that we have a clear understanding of serial killers, we can take a closer look at one. The BTK killer, Dennis Rader from Wichita, Kansas, was active as a killer for 30 years. He is known as BTK because it was self acronymed for how he murdered his victims, binding them, torturing them, and killing them. It was reported that Dennis Lynn Rader grew up relatively normal. He was born on March 9, 1945, in the small town of Wichita, Kansas. He attended Riverview Elementary School, where he was an average to below average student. He exhibited an introverted and withdrawn personality throughout his childhood. Rader admitted that he experienced fantasies about domination, bondage, and torture at a very early age. While no traumatic events were reported in Dennis's childhood, many psychologists that have studied his case believe that something happened early in Rader's life to create what was known as a BTK killer. Dr. Tony Rourke was one of those psychologists. He evaluated Rader after his arrest, and with his findings, he said, "If Rader was completely honest, which he is not, I am sure that we would find some sort of childhood event that Rader immediately associated with feelings of sexuality. Somehow, very early on, Rader encountered an event where he immediately linked sexual pleasure with watching a living creature suffer and die, and after that first encounter, Rader probably began to work very hard to nurture those feelings." Crimes. Although having a seemingly normal life, Dennis went on to commit 10 murders over the span of 30 years before he was taken into police custody. On January 15th, 1974, Rader killed four members of the Otero family. He started his life of crime after severing the phone line and proceeding to break and enter the home of Joseph and Julie Otero. Along with strangling the two homeowners, Rader also killed two of their young children, leaving three older siblings to discover the bodies when they arrived home from school later in the day. On April 4th, 1974, Rader killed a young Catherine Bright. Returning home from work with her brother Kevin, they find Rader waiting with a gun. Kevin somehow managed to survive a gunshot to the head, but was unable to save his sister, who Rader stabbed to death. He was also unable to identify the murderer when taken in for questioning. In October of 1974, Dennis made himself known to the police after one young man allegedly confessed to killing the O'Teras with two friends. An editor at a newspaper received a strange phone call that directed him to a book at the library. Police were notified and found this book and a letter wedged inside, which read, in part, "Those three dudes you have in custody are just talking to get publicity. The code words for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them. BTK. You will see he added again. They will be on the next victim." Along with including unknown details from the Otera murders, the letter is filled with what authorities come to recognize as a peculiar brand of misspellings and grammatical errors, along with a distinct sexually aggressive signature. On December 8th, 1977, after binding and strangling 25-year-old Nancy Fox, Rader alerted the police through way of a payphone. He points them in the right direction of his crime, telling them, "You will find a homicide at the address 843 South Pershing." On January 31st, 1978, the local newspaper received an index card with a poem that begins with, Shirley Locks, wilt thou be mine?" The mail clerk who received this letter actually believed it was an early Valentine's Day card, and therefore it was not reported to the police and ended up being filed incorrectly. On February 10th, 1978, the BTK threat was made public after another letter was submitted. After being angered that his last submitted poem made no appearance in the paper, Dennis sent a more direct message to a local TV broadcaster. The message read, "How many people do I have to kill before I get my name in the paper or some national attention?" The Wichita chief of police followed up this news conference to alert the public of the local presence of the BTK strangler. He explained, "We have no reason but to believe the individual has the capacity to kill again." On April 28, 1979, Rader hides outside the home of Anna Williams, but gives up and leaves when the 63-year-old woman takes too long to return home. Less than 2 months later, Anna Williams learns just how close she was to being BTK's next victim when she receives several of her personal items by mail along with a poem titled, "Oh Anna, why didn't you appear?" On April 27th, 1985, Dennis Rader makes a bold move and decides that his next victim is going to be his neighbor. After dinner with her boyfriend, 53-year-old Maureen Hedge is taken from her home in the Wichita suburb of Park City. Just down the street from Rader's house, she is found dead by strangulation 8 days later. The police failed to connect her murder to BTK at the time. On September 16th, 1986, a man named Bill returned home from work to find his 2-year-old son sitting by himself and his wife, Vicky, dead in their bedroom. In the absence of other credible evidence, the husband became the primary suspect in Vicky's death, and he took the blame for yet another murder committed by Dennis. And then, January 19th, 1991, was the last murder committed by Dennis. He threw a cinder block through a sliding glass door at the home of retiree Dolores Davis, strangled her to death, and left her body by a bridge. After this murder, Dennis Rader ceased his patterned crimes, and BTK dropped off the map, apparently becoming too preoccupied by his day-to-day work schedule and being a father of two. In January of 2004, 13 years after Dennis's last murder and 3 decades after BTK first killed the Otera family, the local newspaper printed an article recalling the terror BTK wielded in the 1970s. The newspaper suggested that he had faded from memory after so many years. Following this printed paper, on March 19, 2004, BTK announced his return. The same newspaper that wrote this article received an envelope from Bill Thomas Kilman containing a copy of Vicky Wergel's missing driver's license, photos of her body, and BTK's distinctive signature. A chilling message that links her unsolved murder to BTK and declares the Wichita Terror to be very much alive. Dennis continued to tease media and police with evidence linking BTK to his past crimes. On May 5, 2004, BTK teased police with a puzzle. On December 13, 2004, a man walking through a park found a garbage bag containing Nancy Fox's driver's license and a Barbie doll with a hood over its head and arms tied behind its back. On January 25, 2005, police found a cereal box on a road outside Wichita containing a graphic description of BTK's first murders and another Barbie doll in an alarming position. A clue that told law enforcement to go to a local Home Depot took them there, where investigators found another cereal box in the bed of an employee's truck. The cereal box included a message asking if BTK could communicate via a computer floppy disk without it being traced, and if so, the police were instructed to run a newspaper ad with the message, "Rex, it will be okay." On January 28, 2005, police ran this quoted message in the newspaper, however, it was not true. On February 16, 2005, a computer disk arriving by mail uncovered BTK's identity, with a hidden metadata that informed police that the disk was used by a dentist at the Christ Lutheran Church and at the Park City Library. Within seconds, an internet search for Christ Lutheran Church revealed the name of its president, Dennis Rader. On February 25, 2005, Rader was arrested. Heading home from work, Dennis was pulled over by a line of police cars trailing him and taken into custody. He confessed after being confronted with DNA evidence collected and saved from a previous case. He admitted in a conversation with law enforcement that he was irritated that they lied to him about the security of communications via a computer disk. On April 19, 2005, Rader waived his right to a preliminary hearing, knowing the court had more than enough evidence to put him on trial. On June 27, 2005, Rader caught his prosecutors off guard by pleading guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder. Dennis Rader provided the court with explicit details on how he selected, stalked, and killed each of his victims. August 18, 2005 was Dennis's two-day sentencing hearing. Throughout the court case and the entire confession, Dennis appeared calm, cool, and collected. There was no sign of remorse as he reiterated his crimes in descriptive detail. He even mentioned how he tried to make his victims comfortable and get them to trust him before ultimately killing them. Although Dennis Rader was a carefully calculated serial killer, the pleasure he got when talking about his crimes is what got him caught. He was so obsessed with making sure he, or rather his very evil alter ego, as he would say, was accredited to all of his committed crimes, and that's what ultimately led police to him in the end. I think the case of Dennis Rader proved my hypothesis wrong, as he did not suffer any traumatic childhood events that would have shaped him to be the serial killer he did. However, this is limited to just the case of Dennis and may not be the same for all serial killers out there. And while I don't think it is hard to determine that Dennis Rader was born a psychopath or with strong psychopathic genes, there are other theories as to why he could have been able to commit these murders so senselessly. The biological components of personality is a theory which states that the anatomical structures a person is born with in their brain contribute to personality traits. As I said before, Dennis Rader was definitely born with some form of antisocial personality disorder, and this is most likely what enabled him to commit the crimes he did. Evolutionary psychology is a theoretical approach to psychology that attempts to explain mental and psychological traits, such as memory, perception, or language, as adaptations. Because of certain things Rader admitted to doing in his youth, like killing cats and dogs by hanging and strangling them, and dreaming of tying girls up and then sexually assaulting them, it can also be assumed that these activities contributed to his future as a serial killer. And lastly, the humanistic theory believes that an individual's behavior is connected to inner feelings and self image. Humanistic psychologists believe that humans are not solely the product of their environment or biology, but more so their value of themselves, which can also reflect back to Dennis. While he claimed to not have experienced any serious trauma as a child, his parents may have lacked when instilling the use of good and healthy choices in him, which also could have led him to develop serious issues when determining what was right and what was wrong, allowing him to become the perfect example of a serial killer.